Hi, I'm Kenny.
And this is Monica.
And you're listening to Questioning Faith,
A podcast where we discuss our journey with the Christian faith.
In today's episode, A Fellow Apostate, Part 1, we have a conversation with a friend of ours who went through similar experiences, but has his own unique story to tell.
We've found as former believers that it's great to talk to people who've been through similar paths. And so it was great hearing his story and just sharing experiences.
Yeah, and we decided to go ahead and go into his story in depth. This is a 3-part series, and we start with introducing where he came from. In the next episode, we'll kind of go through some of the experiences he had that led him out of Christianity, and then the final episode focuses in on kind of the aftermath of that.
Yeah, the fallout, and then a bunch of reasons now he further sees why he was right to leave the faith.
Right.
So we hope you guys enjoy listening to this part 1 of David's testimony. So, how do you two know each other?
I think we met maybe 2013, 2014 possibly.
Yeah, it would have been around that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was a contract musician. I knew some friends. They had ring me up and had me come out, and I would go and play at different churches, play guitar, play electric guitar. And another buddy of mine, John, he was invited out to play drums as well. So This is out in Graham, Texas. Kenny just happened to be out there, and so after the service and eating some good lunch, we all debated the Bible in the parking lot and had a really good time. And
classic worship leaders meeting up after to discuss the Bible.
Yeah, I had tagged along with John. John was a good friend of mine at the time, and he invited me to come out with him, and we got to hang out, meet each other, but we really didn't talk much after that until...
It's kind of, to me, it's like the typical how we communicate these days. It's like we meet, and then we like each other enough to friend each other on Facebook, and then you don't really talk to each other anymore, unless, you know, there's like another time that you hang out.
Exactly. Yeah. It seems to be the world these days.
It is. It's really weird. It's a strange dynamic.
But then we started putting out this podcast, and you saw it, and decided to reach out and kind of make that connection. And we've been talking for the last 6 months now, just kind of back and forth, like sharing each other's stories, and then, sharing stuff that we've been learning about as far as why Christianity doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Right, yeah, y'all met when y'all were both kind of at the pinnacle of your belief, super into Christianity and serving God. And so to find out, I think from both of y'all, you finding out that Kenny had left the faith and then Kenny finding out that you had left the faith, it was just kind of shocking. So it was fun to hear about our mutual experiences leaving the faith.
Definitely, yeah. It's really, really interesting to connect with someone who is obviously someone who is very, very involved with your church. You were a pastor.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that, so it's been great connecting again.
Yeah, I agree. It's been great to have someone who has a similar background to bounce these kinds of ideas off with.
Yeah, particularly leading worship.
Yeah.
Which kind of leads us to, I guess, the next thought, which would be your background.
Yeah, I want to start off with just kind of telling us who you are now, and then we can go through how you got to be where you are now.
Currently, I'm a full-time honors student attending university and really enjoying every minute of it. It's just been a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. Currently a history major. I'm also double minoring in both English and music studies as well. And pretty much my primary focus is to move on to a master's degree. I want to do a joint honors program in ancient history and archaeology, and then continue on to a PhD. So I've got some difficult...
Yeah, you're in it for the long haul here. Yeah.
I'm in for the long haul, but it's been enjoyable. I've loved it so far, so I'm really looking forward to that. But aside from that too, I've also entertained the idea of religious studies as well. Maybe a bachelor's in the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They're just, even though I'm not a believer, it doesn't make them any less fascinating. If anything, they're more fascinating to me now than they were when I was a believer.
Yeah, you can glean so much from people's mindsets so long ago. You get to learn about their culture and about their way of thinking and their family dynamics. It's really interesting.
And then you studying, English, the Bible is referenced all throughout Western literature. And so...
It's influential in every sphere of Western life.
Yeah.
Even if we don't hold to the tenet that God exists.
Yeah, whether it's true or not, it still has such a big impact. It's worth looking at and exploring.
Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. So, other than that, would categorize myself as a geek. I love studying a lot of different things. I'm an avid reader, so I read pretty much on a daily basis. I love it. Obviously, history and archaeology, world religions, constitute, more of my favorite themes, what I like to look into and research.
Could you tell us a bit about your upbringing?
Yeah, so I was actually born into a Jehovah's Witness family. which is interesting because when I say that, it usually raises eyebrows. For a lot of people, they automatically think it's a cult. Well, obviously, if you're Jehovah's Witness, you don't think it's a cult.
Right.
But essentially, Jehovah's Witnesses is just another version of Christianity. And they have their own quirks too. So there's going to be obviously some things that they do that other Christian denominations are going to find weird. And then, the same for them. So, but it's just another subset of Christianity ultimately. But so the major influencer with that religion in my family was my grandfather. He was a major influential elder within the Jehovah's Witness community here in San Angelo when we lived here.
Wow.
He died when I was 11 years old. And pretty much what happened after that, my immediate family, we were extremely poor. And basically after he died, my family, they just stopped going to the Kingdom Hall, which basically is just another name for a church building. And basically my parents, they just chose to work more, try to support us. My grandparents, especially my grandfather, they were like everything to me. I stayed with them a lot. And obviously they would do what, most devout religious believers do. And they would actively indoctrinate me and train me into this Jehovah's Witness way of life.
Yeah.
Of course, I loved every minute of it. It was all normal and it totally made absolute sense.
Well, of course it did, right? I mean, you had like this person who was a big part of your life anyway, and then them telling you something that they believe to be true and teaching you that this is definitely true. So, of course, you take it in.
Yeah, when you're young and you have somebody that you love, that you respect, telling you the truth of what they think is reality, you accept it almost 100% of the time. So I guess when he passes, y'all become less fervent in your faith.
Even though we didn't continuously going to the Kingdom Hall and going door to door and all that good stuff, still held on to the religion, essentially. So we still, in a way, did practice it to a certain extent. So say, for instance, Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't celebrate birthdays or holidays. And so we didn't do that. Anytime we had these parties, in elementary school, with cookies and candy and all the kids hanging out, I had to leave. I had to leave, man, because my religion says it's bad.
Wow.
That sucks. That's brutal.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah. And I think it sticks with you, as you can tell. It sticks with you, you want to hang out with your friends and do time with them instead of, always just sitting there and, working on schoolwork.
Do you find yourself wanting big birthday parties now every year?
I do. Yeah. More presents, bigger presents, make up for all of those years. Essentially, I kind of held on to some of those ideals and just went through life, living just kind of like a basic, just basic lifestyle, going to school, talking about video games and whatever. Of course, it wasn't until, how old was I? I think it was 18 when I was invited to a Super Bowl party. At first, I kind of refused, but they just basically said like, no, we're going to come pick you up and take you. And so
Those are good friends.
Yeah.
I guess that's one way of evangelizing, right?
Yeah.
Just, don't listen to them. Just go and pick them up. It was that Super Bowl party. I got picked up. I went and hung out with a large group of these Bible-believing Christian people, that there was a large variety of them, and there was cool guys and cute girls. And, it was one instance that happened, at that event was my buddy John, who picked me up and took me out there. He randomly handed me an electric guitar and then basically told everyone, hey, check out what this guy can do. And I was like, so embarrassed and it was very awkward, but I loved guitar. I loved music. It was something I was so passionate about that I did basically on my own at home. I never anticipated playing in front of people. I think that kind of began to cement my, I guess you can say, transition into the world of religion again.
It was like your gateway drug of getting into leading worship and getting into this thing that makes you feel good and makes you feel like you belong and all that.
Yeah. My junior high school years and beginning of high school, I was actually quite the late bloomer. It was very socially awkward. And so, in junior high, I was like, the dorky looking kid who basically wore, the same outdated clothes, the scraggly hair and, the big, large plastic glasses with tape all over them. This is way before it was cool. And it certainly didn't help. I was picked on and humiliated. It was a tough time. It was a very tough time. I basically failed every grade over and over again. Eventually started to kind of get out of that in my junior year of high school. And it kind of all paralleled at the same time. I was getting out of that phase, but that's when I started getting involved with the church.
Yeah.
With that, it was like I started to get into the church lifestyle and I was being embraced in a way that I never been embraced before.
Yeah.
You're accepted.
Religion has a way of doing that, of bringing people in who maybe were ostracized in some other way.
Yeah, religion and cults, which for me, that line between between cult and religion has faded away a lot. But within all religions and denominations and brands and cults, they have a way of making people feel like family and embracing them and giving them friends.
Right.
It's very comforting.
It is. And, if you look at it too, with a lot of churches, a lot of their mantras or even the messages that they constantly give every time, people show up, whether it's Wednesday night or Sunday morning or whatever it is, they use that same language. You're welcome. You are loved. You are accepted. We love having you here. Very, the type of language that really just kind of keeps people thinking that they are something unique and special. So.
Right.
So where'd you go from there? At that point, you started being brought into this church, which this was more Baptist.
Your more typical Southern Texas Bible Belt brand of Christianity.
Yeah, the church at that time, I don't know if it's changed at all, but it was considered Southern Baptist.
Yeah.
And so that gives anybody kind of an idea of where it was. We didn't have people speaking in tongues or anything like that. It was typically pretty kind of laid back. And I had actually come in, if anyone's familiar, I'd actually come into Park Heights not long after, I guess you would call the big split. There were many that stayed with Park Heights, but many that branched off. It was a huge split. And I think I don't know exactly all the details, but I think there was a lot of heated stuff that, that usually goes on with church splits.
Yeah.
And a lot of people that kind of disagree with what's going on and they branch off and go, want to go do their thing somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So I had come in just after that. I didn't really know any of that stuff until much later. And for me, aside from the message that was being preached, I had my friends who were like nudging me, and talking to me about, hey, you need to get saved and you need the grace of Jesus. And so for me, it happened right after spring break in March. After having really wrestled, with a few theological issues that kind of plagued my mind for a little bit, I finally chose to embrace that message of salvation. So my buddy John, I met up with him and basically professed that I was a sinner destined for eternity and perpetual torturous hellfire in need of the love of Christ and his grace and salvation. So
yeah, I remember that line. I mean, that's like almost word for word the line, right?
But you really believe it,
Yeah.
You really believe that you're transitioning from a worthless, and wicked individual into somebody that God is pleased with through Jesus's power.
Yeah.
And so you really buy in. It's not, it is a line. It's a classic line that the Baptists convince you of, but you're fully convinced of it at the time.
Exactly. Yeah. And like I mentioned too, I did wrestle with these things a little bit. And I think part of it had to do with my previous background, obviously.
Sure.
And I guess one of the main lines that really just kind of hooked me in, it's a classic line too, is, it was repeatedly used, was, this is not about religion, it's about relationship.
Right.
Yep.
And then they reinforced that by saying, well, obviously you were a Jehovah's Witness, and the reason why you're struggling is because you were part of a religion.
Mm-hmm.
This is a relationship. And so, when you're impressionable high school kids surrounded by, all these people who really want you to be a part of their tribe, their group, it really starts to mold your brain. And I believe it molded me rather quickly. And so it took me a few months, but before long, I was all in. By the time I got to that point, I was more than willing to pray the sinner's prayer and get saved and embrace this lifestyle that Jesus had for me. I was ready to go.
Yeah.
And then, like we said earlier, I met you as a worship leader, and you've already mentioned that you were really into music. So I would assume from there, probably wasn't long before you started leading worship.
Exactly. Yeah. It was only a few months later. I think late July, I believe, our church was actually doing a mission trip heading to California, which for a poor little impoverished boy who had barely even crossed the state of Texas to go to California. this is all God.
Yeah.
And so, of course, you're packing into a bus with all these other people that you adore and, they adore you. So anyway, we wanted to have a little worship session before we actually, packed the bus and took off. And it just so happened to be that our main guitarist, who had been playing with them for a while, I think he was out on vacation or something like that, out of town. And they were like, wow, who better to push up on the stage and play these little 3-chord songs and worship us right into our mission trip. There I am, this awkward kid who's just never played a stage ever before. I basically was pretty much just pushed onto stage,
Yeah, that's another thing that Christianity and religion kind of does to people, is it hones in on people's talents and skills and then moves them up the ladder in the church and into leadership and into some sort of authority authority position, and it really makes you feel part of it.
Yeah, that, and I've said this before, like that is something they've got down.
Yeah.
They have that down. They'll find your strengths, and then they have a way of just putting you within, different positions in the church that actually utilize those strengths.
Yeah.
So for me, yeah, I mean, that's exactly what happened. And so only just within like a handful of years later, maybe like 5 years or so, I'd been playing with all these different worship bands, like basically all over town. Kind of became like this Christian musician network, and music was becoming like a big thing in this town. And if you were at least halfway decent a musician, people would talk about you, or someone needed someone to fill in a spot. Like it's like, oh, I know David or whoever, or John or whatever. And so, yeah, so definitely along the way, I met a lot of people developing basically a reputation as a well-known local Christian guitarist here in San Angelo anyway.
You didn't stay in San Angelo, right? You went on to the Metroplex.
Yes. So the summer of 2005, me and a whole group of Christian friends drove to the Metroplex, and we attended an all-day Christian concert in the Dallas area. It's called Celebrate Freedom. I don't know if y'all have heard of it.
Is that still going on? Like, do they still do that every year or something?
I'm sure they probably do. It's like a huge event. From what I understand, like hundreds of thousands of people go to, and it's one of the biggest fireworks shows in Texas.
Dang.
Okay.
Out of, these thousands of people out there, I happened to run into some old musician friends who were there. And while there, several of us, we wanted to begin this dedicated process of forming our own Christian band, like committing to writing and recording and playing music. This is a serious thing for us. This is a divinely mandated, godly ministry that we felt compelled to put together. So with that, 2 years later, in January of 2007, we had basically made this decision to pack up and leave our hometown of San Angelo and traveled across Texas to the Metroplex and ended up in Arlington, Texas. And at that point, I had moved across Texas with my lead singer. So my lead singer and his wife and some of our other musicians, they chose to stay back home because they were just more committed to family here. And so obviously we knew we needed some new musicians once we got to the Metroplex, which obviously that was another God thing that happened. About a year later after moving to the Metroplex, I actually started dating his daughter. Wow, not his daughter. His niece, in that we just, within that relationship, it's obviously of God. We just knew it throughout different encounters, whether it was like while we were attending church on, a Sunday morning, or whether we were off on camp or whatever it was. We had many people who would prophesy over us. They would talk about like our future children or how our marriage would prosper.
What did that feel like as a Christian? Kind of explain that kind of feeling of being prophesied over and
what you thought of it being prophesied over and everything.
Well, for me, in those experiences where I was personally, it was exciting because I had, up to that point, I had been with so many different types, I guess, flavors, I guess you could say, of Christianity, laid back traditional types, all the way to like, not exactly the snake handling type, but maybe just a notch or two below that, where it's like the crazy speaking in tongues, people getting healed, crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And so in those situations, when those did happen, it didn't freak me out. If anything, it excited me even more because these people of God were speaking over me and telling me, hey, your godly marriage is going to be blessed in this way, and they're talking about your kids and they're talking about your future and how things are going to turn out. It was exciting and it was very encouraging.
Yeah. I mean, I know what you're talking about. I mean, I didn't get very much into more charismatic sides of church, but I had been prophesied over or had that feeling of God is calling me to go and do something. There's a certain amount of like self-affirmation that goes with that just kind of makes you feel good about the decisions you're making.
And that God has his hand on your life. So it's going to work out no matter what.
Yeah.
For the best.
Exactly.
You got prophesied over, you got married.
While you're married, you try to find different things to do to entertain yourselves. And so we play Xbox every once in a while. And so we chose to pay for this new thing called Netflix. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but I hear it's a big deal. Instantly just loved it. This is TV on your terms.
Yeah.
Personally, I began filling up my Netflix queue with just diverse topics that I kind of put off. Everything from pirates to dinosaurs to archaeology and history, you know, whatever it may be that seemed very interesting.
Netflix was a learning tool for you.
It was very integral. It was enjoyable, a way for me to kind of not only just, you know, have just basic entertainment here and there, but it was kind of fulfilling a part of me that I just never really embraced.
Yeah, things you wanted to learn about, you were finally getting to experience some.
Exactly, yeah.
Nice. Where did that lead you? Learning about all this stuff through Netflix. I imagine that kind of was a bit of a catalyst for you.
It was, yeah. So after about a year of being married, unfortunately, the relationship, it actually became extremely toxic. It was really bad and basically faltered very quickly. We actually embraced Christian counseling there for a little while, for about like 5 months or so. If you get to a point where you're just like beating a dead horse, you basically just realize, you know, it's better to just separate and move on. Within our Christian circles, divorce is not something that just kind of just casually happens. I mean, does it happen all the time? Yes, but it's not something that you just kind of just do for fun, you know?
Right.
But due to the nature of the situation, you use your religion to justify the direction that you want to go. And obviously with us, it was like we use biblical passages to justify our divorce.
Okay.
So it gave us a little bit of peace because it was biblical that we were separating. So.
Exactly. Those justifications y'all found in Christianity and in the Bible, how did that square with the previous prophecies and guarantees that you felt you had from before that were essentially rooted in the Bible as well?
Yeah, you know what's interesting is at that time, I don't even remember thinking back on those things. Because for me, I was just so rooted within my beliefs that no matter what happens, I guess whatever excuse you can make up, whether it's free will or falling away or being deceived by the devil or whatever it may be, the thing is you can always bounce back because you have God and you can always bounce back. And so did it ever spark anything within me? I don't believe it did. Not one bit. It just happened to be that something unfortunate had happened, but it still doesn't mean that God can't deal with the situation 100%. It still doesn't mean that I can't move forward and still fall within the plan that God has for me.
Right. And that makes sense. I mean, when prophecies are fulfilled, when they work out according to what you believe God said it would, then you say, oh yes, this is proof that God exists. But when they don't work out, you say, well, human sin got in the way or something blocked God's will in some form or fashion to make it not happen. So that way you never have to face the actual inconsistency.
Right. That is so true. Looking back on, say, the situation with my deconstruction, if you will, I would say, you know, the unexpected form of entertainment that set my deconstruction in motion, it was Netflix.
That's because Netflix is the devil.
And you know, and to be honest too, if Netflix is the devil, then so is the internet and so is free inquiry, you know.
Anything that would spread information and knowledge. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, for me at that time, through the whole separation divorce process, I basically was just using my newfound freedom and singleness to basically just keep diving into these diverse subjects, you know, learn about them, just have fun with it. Kind of became like an obsession, like a healthy obsession. And so I just really enjoyed learning about these different things, whether it's Aztecs or mummies or Socrates or Hypatia or Carl Sagan and space travel and wormholes. You know, it was all just really fascinating stuff. I felt so ignorant about so many things. I was just like, why do I not know about this stuff? You know, it's just so interesting and fascinating. But what's interesting with that too is I think once you start going down these rabbit holes, for me, it was like other things started to creep in too. Theology starts to creep in, and then diversity of religions. So anything from like Buddhism or Islam, you know, Baha'i or Zoroastrianism, you know, it started to seep in, and I started to realize there is so much more diversity than I ever had any clue. You know, it just started to click with me. Learning these different things, you know, over time I soon began to discover that there were some problems between what I believed as a Christian as well as what I had been taught to believe for my entire life in comparison to what I had been learning for a while. And these things were not squaring, they're not paralleling with my beliefs and my lifestyle that I obviously was so passionate about. You know, many times these issues, they were just so far off the radar that I absolutely knew that I had to spend more time doing more valuable research in order to make any sense of it.
Do you have any examples? Like, were you a younger creationist before, or?
So what's interesting is back then, when I think about some of those labels, I never realized I was that label.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
I was.
Yeah, that's what I feel like happened to me as well.
No, definitely. I mean, to answer your question, young earth creationist, yes, definitely. Like, I was all about whatever the Bible was. I mean, this is the inerrant word of the all-powerful creator deity of the universe. Therefore, whatever is in it, or whatever it can show to be its kind of truth, I guess, was absolute truth for me. So
Yeah.
definitely.
So yeah, learning about astronomy, Carl Sagan, I mean, that totally blows all that out of the water. So
It does.
So what did you do to make sense of that, to get rid of that kind of cognitive dissonance?
That was a process in itself, quite difficult. Obviously, this is a slowly intensifying discomfort that begins to creep into your mind. And with cognitive dissonance, I would say it's essentially like you're just trying to make sense of things that shouldn't make sense, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Reconciling two things that don't actually go together.
Exactly. And, for me, that was exactly what was going on. It was small, it was slow in the beginning, and of course, it increases over time. And so these things were happening with my mind from these indulgences and learning many things. But for me, I just kept going. I just kept going with both. I embraced both. Extremely difficult to let go of your beliefs, especially if these are beliefs that you've been so dedicated to, that you love for so long. I find it hard to believe if there's anyone who actually goes, oh, well, this doesn't make sense. I'm no longer religious,
Right. It's more of a process. Like, you learn new stuff and then change your theology a little bit, tiny, tiny bits at a time, to try to make it all make sense.
Yeah, I can remember when I started rejecting the whole idea of there being a young Earth.
Yeah.
Finally actually embracing the knowledge that is out there and learning that, the universe is some 14 billion years old or whatever it is. And
Right.
like finding ways to say, well, yeah, so the Bible's still true. This word, it could mean this as well. Instead of meaning a day, it means a period of time, and so God created the earth not really in 7 days. It was these 7 periods or whatever, just finding ways to make it fit.
Right. Okay, evolution is true. I have to admit it finally. Well, it was God that got it all into action, and it went through all the stages as described in the Bible. Like different ways that you just keep adjusting your theology to fit the knowledge that you learn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think you see that too a lot with religion in general.
Right.
If you were to step back to, say, the Catholic Church in like the 1500s, many of these concepts that even the Catholic Church accepts today, back then were blasphemy. Like, you go to the stake and burn alive simply because you believe these things. And so religion has, just like we did, you mold yourself, you change with the science, you change with the facts.
Right.
Yeah, so dealing with cognitive dissonance, you are pressing on in both your religion and in your pursuit of knowledge. Where did that lead you?
So at that point, I obviously just trying to reconcile these things within my mind, no matter how big or small they were. But within the summer of 2012 is when I really felt it was time. Obviously, this is in God's perfect timing, of course. It was time for me to peacefully leave my band. And I had been with the group for 7 years. And obviously, my home church that I had been associated with for a few years. And, continue on to what I felt was essentially just a much needed transition to increase my pursuance of personal, spiritual, and musical growth. And I was also excited because I wanted to begin an educational journey in music and biblical studies and to attain a bachelor's in music. And this would be offered through, it was a new theological university that was opening up there in Southlake, Texas. It's called the King's University. And the school is just intimately associated with the megachurch Gateway Church, as well as Jack Hayford Ministry. So if you're unaware who Jack Hayford is, he's considered like the Paul of our lifetime. He's incredibly influential. Through these avenues, they were able to basically start up this university and essentially train the next generation of Bible-believing Christians. The influence of Gateway is massive. They have well-known pastors and musicians, worship leaders, as well as authors. And it's also a place where they write a lot of, your well-known, famous Christian songs. A basic lineup of people would be like pastor and author Robert Morris. He's written the books like The Blessed Life, The Blessed Church, The God I Never Knew. Also pastor, songwriter, and author Zach Neese. He ended up being my main worship pastor that I ended up playing with the majority of the time. He's known for writing the song The More I Seek You, as well as many other known songs as well.
Yeah.
Mark Harris, he's like previously a member of the Christian band For Him, and I liked playing with him. He was a lot of fun to play with. And then there's also worship leaders, like Cody Carnes, and then you have Dove Award winner Carrie Job, as well as the Jonas Brothers. So I counted myself just beyond blessed that I was part of this type of influential culture. They were just so passionate about spreading the love of God. And, and also the fact that it was just normal for me to hang out with these well-known believers who contributed so much, to the kingdom of God.
Yeah,
right.
More affirmation there.
Exactly.
Just kind of continues to contribute to that. And I mean, I remember playing The More I Seek You, leading, worship with that, Carrie Job songs, or just getting the Gateway Worship albums that come out like every year or every other year, whatever it is. Now you have a new set of songs to learn. And so, very influential church that you got to be a part of.
Obviously I'd been a musician for a long time. I was playing with Gateway, but I also wanted to increase my musical and essentially my faith, so that I could actually be a part of and write alongside with these people, in order to reach the world for Christ. I mean, that was the ultimate goal.
Yeah, absolutely. At Gateway, and it was while you're at the King's University that your faith eventually started to crumble. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I'd say just, during my time, while I was attending Gateway, as well as TKU, it was tough because obviously, I'm thinking I am on the ultimate road, that God has me on. I mean, I did not doubt that at all whatsoever. But, I also made it a point, while attending, to continue intensifying my learning and research into Christianity in order to solidify my faith as well. So the transition to Gateway Church and the King's University was a huge step for me. And after, a short period of those auditions that they have, it's a very extensive process that they have. They don't let anybody up there. I mean, it's like a very lengthy process. And it was a short time. I was right back up. I was right back up there again, with a whole new fervor and vigor for my faith, striving for this closeness with God. And interestingly enough, it would be during my time at Gateway and attending these courses while I was at TKU that I call what I experience an intense buildup of chaos within my mind, and which basically spurred me to start writing, I guess, personally blogging like a madman. It was kind of it's very therapeutic for me, putting into words, trying to figure this out. And so writing for me was the answer to that. So obviously, I'm writing documents, I'm sending emails to myself. I'm doing this, but at the same time, I'm still spending a lot of time diving into different subjects of interest, but also trying to parallel, justify, and make sense what I was learning independently with what I was learning while at school or while I was, at Gateway. At that time, I really started to dive into not only the Bible, obviously, because, I'm attending a Bible college.
Right.
But realizing too, a strange little revelation for myself that there's so many different versions of the Bible. And, many of them have their own different take on definitions or wording. And so started really, diving into that, trying to gain a better understanding of the Bible. And then obviously other holy books that I was totally clueless about. You have the Mesoamerican Popol Vuh or the Avesta, for Zoroastrians, or the Tripitaka for Buddhists, and the Quran for Islam. But at the same time, looking into documents specifically that came from Mesopotamian and Egyptian, Hittite and Canaanite origins that really served as, the origins of a lot of Jewish religion.
Right.
And within these studies, it was shocking. I learned that over the course of human history that mankind had invented more than 5,000 gods, goddesses, and demigods. Christianity alone literally has thousands of different versions in itself, many who don't even agree with each other.
Yeah. Right.
This became extremely problematic for me. I mean, it was fascinating, but at the same time,
adds more to that cognitive dissonance.
It does.
Yeah.
And so for me, I began, to ask myself these, take a step back, ask myself these awkwardly difficult and even uncomfortable questions. And what's interesting is that many of these questions, whether it's kind of active or passive, these are questions that your church, your pastors advise you to not get into or dive into, right?
Yeah.
Kind of command or even condemn believers to not ask about, or essentially just kind of steer clear from, you know, it's just unnecessary. Don't even bother with it.
Yeah.
That religion's wrong. Don't even, it's not even worth it. But with that, I started to ask these questions to myself, why am I a Christian and say not a Shiite or a Sunni Muslim?
Right.
Or why am I not a Jew or a Zoroastrian? Why am I not a Taoist or a Hindu or a Buddhist or a Jain or a Sikh or,
any other religion that's out there?
Yeah, thousands of religions that even exist today. Probably more importantly, I asked myself, why do I consider myself this non-denominational evangelical Christian? Why am I not a Jehovah's Witness or a Methodist or Mormon, Baptist, Southern Baptist, Quaker, a Nazarene, a Catholic, or any of these other countless versions of Christianity. I asked uncomfortable questions like, what is hell? Does it actually exist? Like, what actual proof is there that it actually does exist?
There's the most dangerous question of all. Where's the proof?
And, it was like, in that moment, it's kind of scary. You've been indoctrinated to the point where you're like, oh, are these evil thoughts? Or is this the devil taking hold? Or I shouldn't be thinking these thoughts. These are not pure. These are not holy thoughts. When you start asking things like, who's the devil? Where does he come from? And, I think probably one of the biggest ones for me was, who is this Jesus character mentioned in the New Testament? Where does he come from? What proof is there that he actually existed? And I guess you could even ask too, like, what kind of proof and evidence out there that shows that there's a possibility he may not exist?
Yeah. And then even if he did exist, what evidence is there to show that he's divine in any way, even if he was a real person?
Exactly. So with that, those are just a small list of questions that I chose to ask and then seek the answers to. Obviously, no matter how uncomfortable or disturbing the answers might have been, it was definitely a psychologically and emotionally difficult time. But over time, I definitely felt empowered and much more knowledgeable and understanding. Honestly, with that, I wasn't seeking to destroy my faith. I wasn't seeking to...
Right. Who sets out to destroy their own faith and what they believe, right?
It was just to find the truth of your faith. To polish off anything that we weren't believing correctly. But it was always with the goal of making our faith stronger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was it for me. I mean, I was on a journey to seek out ultimate truth, capital T truth, this pure, brutal, rub you the wrong way, unadulterated truth. Again, it wasn't about destroying my faith. It was to seek out ultimate truth. It was kind of disturbing, say, for instance, if, one of my instructors at TKU or maybe at Gateway, they would contradict each other, maybe with like a sermon or biblical claims or something that just didn't set right with me. I would make it a point to research these things in order to reach rational conclusions. And in fact, many of them were actually quite uncomfortable conclusions. But I would say even with that, I did not become like an unbeliever on the spot. I was still hardcore believer. I just happened to like stumble upon some uncomfortable things. But I would say before long, I found that my particular version of Christianity, and I think essentially along with every other religion I had been researching, it just no longer made sense. They were essentially, all of them, they were just basically false ideologies that utilize, indoctrination, this indoctrination that serves to rewire and mold our brains to believe that that specific version or that specific version of Christianity was absolute truth. And all others were false.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I had crossed a line that I could no longer go back to. And ultimately, I had exposed myself to the reality that Christianity was indeed what I call a psychologically delusional mind slavery, blood sacrifice cult religion.
Yeah.
With that, it was a shocking realization. Also, the fact that I had devoted and invested so much of my life and, my emotions and my time and my finances, all of that to a lie is essentially just a prison designed to look like a mansion. In the end, it was disheartening and it was upsetting and unsettling.
Yeah, I remember that.
It's a tough realization. But, in the end, I had to be totally honest with myself and to come to a place where I chose one of two paths. The first one was either to continue lying to myself and everyone else while continuing on a very familiar path that was comfortable and it was familiar, it was popular, or I could choose a path of being brutally honest with myself and the world, no matter what the consequences would be.
Yeah.
And
in
the end, I chose the latter.
Yeah, it's a crucially important step to get to admit to yourself that you either have to follow the truth no matter the consequences or let the consequences dictate your truth. And being able to accept that that's what you're about to do is just essential for progress.
Yeah, and I remember
shaking yourself.
I remember us having that conversation in our deconversion, that moment of realizing like how everything that we've been learning is just in direct contradiction with what we believe. And it's scary and it has some drastic consequences that change everything that your life was before. But it's the same thing. It's do we allow that fear to stop us from moving forward, or or do we want the actual truth? Do we want to be honest, regardless of consequences?
Once you cross that line, though, of realizing that God has just been your imaginary friend, you can't trick yourself into believing in him again. Ultimately, even if you try to continue lying to yourself, once you get to a certain threshold, you can't convince yourself of it anymore.
Yeah.
There's a point of no return.
So I know there's plenty more to your story. I want to talk about what comes from that point of your revelation to you actually coming out as no longer believing. And I also want to talk about, I really love the way you put that, the psychologically delusional mind slavery, blood sacrifice cult religion.
Yeah, maybe we can define that more soon.
But first, I think maybe this is probably a good place to stop this conversation, ask a few questions for our listeners, and then we can pick up there in our next episode.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So I guess questions for our listeners.
I liked that cognitive dissonance discussion. So, question I would ask is there anything that you have learned or studied in the past that makes you uncomfortable or doesn't really fit with your beliefs, religious or otherwise? And how do you deal with that? So, in other words, like, what cognitive dissonance do you currently have in your life or have you experienced in your life, and how are you going about dealing with it? And David, do you want to ask one?
So were you born into a religion of your parents and actively indoctrinated to believe that religion was ultimate truth while all others were false?
So that kind of goes along with another question that I think is beneficial to ask, which is, what is the likelihood that if you were born in like Saudi Arabia, you'd be a Muslim, or if you were born in India, you'd be Hindu? So how much does your geography and time play into your religion, and how does that affect your belief system?
So those questions were, what cognitive dissonance do you currently have or have you had in the past? And how do you reconcile that?
And were you born into religion of your parents and actively indoctrinated to believe that religion was ultimate truth while all others were false?
And how much does geography and time play into your religion, and why is that the case?
Thanks for listening to Questioning Faith.
We hope you guys enjoyed it.
If you have any thoughts or questions, you can reach us at kennyandmonicaAskQuestions@gmail.com.
You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter.
Our next episode, A Fellow Apostate, Part 2, will be available on February 3rd. But until then, remember,
always ask questions.
Hi, I'm Kenny.
And this is Monica.
And you're listening to Questioning Faith,
a podcast where we discuss our journey with the Christian faith.
In today's episode, A Fellow Apostate Part 2, we continue our discussion with David about his experiences with the faith.
It seems like this episode kind of focuses on the inner conflict that he was feeling, because he was starting to have a lot of questions, a lot of doubt, but he was also very much still a believer, trying to reconcile those doubts.
Yeah, that cognitive dissonance that he had to grapple with and eventually confront and figure out what the truth is.
Right. It's a rough time, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. I think anyone who's left the faith can really relate to that.
So I hope you enjoy this episode of Questioning Faith. In our last episode, we went through your life in faith, David. You're starting out as a Jehovah's Witness and then eventually going into other branches of Christianity, and how you really dug deep in, and then eventually through various different studies and learning more about the realities of the world, eventually coming to this conclusion that there's no way it can be true. The cognitive dissonance is just overwhelming, and this religion, this blood cult, is something that doesn't really fit with reality. But as we know,
you're participating in helping to lead worship at Gateway, a massive church with all these influential people.
Right. Not only are you heavily involved in it, this religion, this faith is also heavily involved in everything that you've come to be. And so you can't just snap a finger and suddenly you're out. So I guess now the next part is, okay, what happens next? Once you've come to this realization that this thing that you have believed for most of your life,
there's at least some severe problems with it.
What did you do next?
Well, what I did next was I actually accelerated my faith to 100%.
Further all in.
Exactly.
Yeah. You couldn't just accept that this couldn't be true anymore. You had to cry out to God, make this true, make it work.
Yeah, what am I missing? How come this looks like it's not real?
Well, at the same time, too, I wasn't exactly what I call just an average pew warmer. I was attending a theological university, and there were some bills that are piling up really fast. This is something that I've invested very heavily in. And sure, yeah, I'm playing for Gateway. I'm employed by Gateway Church as a musician, who plays many times throughout the week.
Yeah, so this is your source of income too.
Exactly. Yeah, this is how I'm feeding myself and paying my bills. And so there's a lot going on. You mentioned earlier, I can't just snap my fingers and just walk away. And, even at that point, I didn't even feel like that was still a realistic thing to do. With that, keep in mind too, that this is a university environment that's overflowing with like excitedly hardcore Bible believing Christians who are like, they're passionate about changing the world for Jesus. And, just as many other future students were thinking that this is a straightforward calling directly from God. Like I felt the same way. Like this was a divinely mandated stepping stone for my life to get closer to God, ultimately become a songwriter for Gateway Church to reach the world. But what's interesting is, while I was attending TKU, I'm obviously surrounded within this culture of these hardcore Bible believing Christians. But the cool thing is there's also this really thick music culture as well. So there's all these passionate, and I will say like there were a lot of really, really good musicians and singers that were there. So for me, it just made sense to team up with some of these musicians and actually pursue like a project that would not only be, challenging and unique, but I felt it would be something that would glorify God. So what I did was I started talking to fellow musicians, basically just bringing a group of songwriters together to seek the heart of the Lord and write and record these new God-inspired songs. But for me, obviously the cognitive dissonance, the struggles building within my mind and through my writings, I did what I have personally witnessed that most Christians do whenever they do experience this kind of discomfort of coming to the realization that this delusional and false nature of their religion and beliefs. I set out on a mission to accelerate my faith to 100%. And I've noticed that that's typically a common theme. The problem is that when an individual chooses to live their life embracing these ideologies, these dogmas for so long, their mind finds it extremely difficult to square their beliefs with these concepts of biblical inerrancies and scientific and natural truths. And I found that the typical response for a believer is to significantly amplify their faith in some form or another. I think for some, what they do is they allow their religion to just override everything. And this could be to the extent where they may even cease to even continue questioning their beliefs. So for me, I see it as a way of basically injecting themselves with more religious poison in order to continue numbing and inoculating themselves from the discomforts of this cognitive dissonance that they're experiencing.
And you feel like that's what you did to yourself at this point?
Well, to a certain extent, but there are a few believers who do amplify their beliefs, but they still maintain that brutal honesty with themselves, and they still remain vigilant in the uncomfortable search for that pure, unadulterated truth. So as uncomfortable and emotionally taxing as it was, I personally chose to embrace the latter. It was difficult, but I still chose to go down that road. I mean, for me, if Christianity was in fact absolutely true, or at least my version of Christianity was true, then I wanted to know with certainty that it was pure, honest, unadulterated truth. But even with that, I still chose to press forward with that writing and recording project, allow the God of the Bible to work through me and other musicians to not only work through us and create new worship music through our God-given gifts and talents, but I also wanted this opportunity to assist in helping me to put to rest this cognitive torment and this inability to square these parallels I had been working through up to that point.
I mean, I remember a phase going through that when I have some serious doubts and I'm very concerned that it's not real. So then you just read the Bible more and you worship more fervently because as a Christian, I've heard of stories of people going through phases of doubt or the devil could be, doing something to you. And so you are trying to, because you want it to be real and you don't want to have wasted your time and your life worshiping this thing. So you try really hard to believe it. And so you do everything that you can.
While at the same time, trusting that this truth that you have subscribed to for so long will prove out in the end. As you dig into all of these other things that are supposedly contradicting what you believe, in the end,
you'll find out why you were wrong. You'll find out why your reasons for doubting God are wrong. That's your hope, at least through it, is that you'll come out the other side realizing that God is real, He is with you, and that you were just wrong for some reason.
Yeah. And I found myself kind of like what you were saying, identifying with, there was like a leper or something in John who said, Jesus, I believe, help my unbelief.
Yeah.
I'm going to believe.
Yeah.
Despite like all of this stuff that contradicts everything that I believe and help me understand this stuff that's making me not believe.
Yeah, exactly. While still earnestly seeking out the questions questions
Right.
to make sure.
Exactly.
We're not just going to accept it blindly. We're going to keep following where the knowledge leads.
Right. From my experience, that's actually kind of an anomaly in itself. From what I've seen, and obviously if I can be proven wrong, I'll be proven wrong. But, usually what I see is the majority of people, if they do encounter these things, then they allow the religion, their faith or whatever, typically to override.
Yeah.
Very few believers have I seen who actually say, you know what, I feel uncomfortable, but I'm going to keep going. I'm going to stick to my guns and I'm going to keep going because this is so important to me that I keep going down this uncomfortable road because I know that it's going to come to a head and that God will reveal himself, or maybe I'm just going down a road that is just kind of not aligned in a way that is showing my truth to be true.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that other group, I suppose, I think that religion just kind of has a built-in system to encourage that kind of belief. Well, it's a mystery, right? The refrain that I heard most of my life, God's ways are higher than our ways. And so, it seems like it doesn't fit, but surely it does. And you just have to believe more.
Yeah, you just don't understand it.
And then also that what you mentioned last time, the leaders discouraging certain questions. Really what leads down this path of finding things that do contradict. And I don't think the leaders are doing that in any kind of malicious way to try and cover up something that they know is false. I think that it's more, that's just going to cause headaches. That's going to cause you to go through this, I think the way you phrased it was cognitive torment. And instead, just let it be and have faith and you'll be fine. You were doing this songwriting project. And how did that go?
Yeah, so they're attending the school. I mean, just in no time. It was actually quite easy. I put together somewhere between 12 to 15 musicians who were all interested in getting together for this project.
Nice.
Of course, you see that as a God thing. And another friend of mine who actually had a home recording studio, just in casual conversation with him, like I didn't even ask him. And he offered his recording studio to our group for free whenever he wanted to come in. Just let him know. And obviously that
Another
affirmation, this is a God thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So throughout the fall of 2014 and the spring of 2015, those semesters, different groups of us who we would meet on a schedule and meet on the weekends. When we met, I positioned myself to be a leader of this group. The agenda was obviously to pray. When we came together, we prayed. We would read through the Bible for a little bit, hear what the Lord is speaking to you at that time or whatever. And obviously it's just seeking the heart of the Lord. And in order for him to speak through us and utilize our talents to create music, ultimately to glorify his name. And you all get together and you've got your own little tribe. But after that year of getting together, everyone was getting occupied, with vacations and whatnot. So basically I just chose to just halt the project for the summer. But at that time, due to the summer schedule, opening up with a lot more free time for myself, I basically chose to apply myself deeper into my studies and actually with a much more nuanced focus on the Abrahamic religions themselves. Okay. So I really wanted to dive in more on, say Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. By the time I got to this point, my mind had already overcome that cognitive dissonance and what I call the psychologically delusional mind slavery cult sacrifice religion that my mind had been trapped in for so long. And in short, I had crossed a line and there was simply no turning back no matter what I did. I had literally transitioned into a non-believer without even realizing it. Mm-hmm. What I have found is that many believers, they assume that there is a quick and decisive moment from transitioning from a believer into a non-believer, but it is in fact actually a process.
Yep.
And the process is usually lengthy, it's uncomfortable, it's painful, it's disheartening, and it's sometimes very disturbing process as well. And speaking from being a one-time believer, as a believer, you can still look at the thousands of contradictions, all the divinely committed, commanded, condoned rape and slavery and violence and genocide within the Bible, and your brain still be wired in a way to believe that the Bible is still true and that your God is good.
Yeah.
However, it does take the active reconstruction, the rewiring, the reprogramming of a distortedly, psychologically delusional, clouded religious brain to finally reach a point of being totally free of its cognitive religious enslavement.
Yeah, it's step by step. Like, you have to accept things slowly and painstakingly.
Yeah, it doesn't happen overnight.
No, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, too.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, and, in the end, I felt that it was in my best interest to apply myself to reach solid conclusions, instead of continuing forward in this flux, if you will. And I just needed to be brutally honest with myself and which direction I could take, no matter what the consequences would be.
So you had, this year of kind of being able to put off this moment with the songwriting, but then once you had a break from that, it's easier to stay in it when you surround yourself with 12 to 15 other people who are just going to keep confirming or affirming things that you once believed. But so you came to this point then once all of that was gone and you were alone with yourself again, where you were back to that moment of, okay, now, so what do I do? I realize that this is false. Before you go into your conclusions, I want to take a step back, and you've mentioned this phrasing. You describe Christianity as a psychologically delusional, mind slavery, blood sacrifice cult religion.
Yeah, what does that mean to you?
I would say, with psychologically delusional, there is no doubt that religion it's a brain virus.
Yeah.
It's like a psychological cancer. The human brain is very malleable. It's a very impressionable organ. We humans are subject to many, many cognitive distortions in which the brain can be shaped. It can be molded. I like to see it as the brain is basically a conglomeration of trillions of neurotransmitters, obviously.
Yeah.
But I like to see it as just a bunch of roads and alleys and highways and byways and even construction sites that ultimately guide how we humans form and process information, as well as even making sense of that information.
Mm-hmm.
So just as we can strengthen these roads to become better, say, at like math or English or learning a new language or training our minds to endure, say, like emotional intelligence or overcome depression, so too can we can form roads, these pathways that can even serve to strengthen, reinforce, and rationalize distorted concepts.
Oh, for sure.
So delusional thinking is kind of like deceiving yourself by believing these outrageous or fantastic things.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
All humans, they experience some measure of delusion. Say, for instance, many of us, when we were children, we rationalized the delusional concept of a fat man in a red suit who traversed the world in one night on a sleigh led by flying reindeer.
Yeah.
And as a child, this delusion was by far a reality.
Right, you really believe it. And you buy into it so hard because you think you might not get gifts if you don't, depending on who taught you about Santa. So you really believe it.
And then you have people like me, when I was a child, who we didn't celebrate holidays.
Right.
Yeah.
I still understood what Santa was, and I wanted to believe.
Yeah.
Even though I was taught it's not true and that we do not celebrate any of that stuff, I still wanted to believe that it was true.
Yeah.
But, ultimately for these people, and hopefully anyway, it finally takes that painful experience of that cognitive dissonance, that, paralleling this fantastic concept, Santa Claus, with reality to finally come to the realization that it was in fact none of it's true at all. I think even scarier too, and we see a lot of this these days, is, we can be delusional and beyond convinced that the earth is flat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of people out there who will argue you to the end of time, that the earth is actually flat, or like the Holocaust never happened, or obviously that a book with examples of talking burning bush and talking animals, or a divine man born of a virgin that turned water into wine are actually true.
Yeah. The psychologically delusional aspect being that we find ways to deceive ourselves, form those pathways in our head to confirm these stories that most certainly don't line up with reality.
Yeah, and the nature of Christianity and how it functions helps to build those pathways so that you don't really have a choice to not believe it at a certain point.
Yeah. And I liked your initial statement there that religion is a brain virus. It goes from person to person. It's through our words and it's through ideas that are expressed, but it latches in.
Yeah, to where it's literally changing our body.
Yeah.
Exactly. The same can be said for many other things that don't have to do with religion. It could be politics, or it could be a poisonous relationship or marriage. You allow the virus to set in and it becomes a reality.
So the next part then is mind slavery. And so I'm assuming the thing that keeps us from working on it.
Yeah. So we can do a little Bible study real quick. Utilizing scripture, 2 Corinthians says, demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ.
Yeah.
But the problem is that this is a dictatorial command of demolishing any arguments that set themselves up against this God. And this is mind slavery. This is taking thoughts captive is not freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And you have, say, like Proverbs 3 that says, trust the Lord with all thine heart and lean not unto thine own understanding.
It's the key to success for a religion, though. You create a invisible, inaudible God and then say that you can't question that or you're in sin or he's not going to save you.
Exactly. Yeah. And the problem here is that the Bible repeatedly commands that a devoted believer who takes the scripture at face value, not have confidence in obviously the natural processes of free will inquiry of their own mind, taking captive their thoughts and their understanding and conform to a delusional and distorted way of thinking. When you step outside the bubble, it's easy to see this kind of thing.
Yeah.
When you're inside of it, you do everything you can to justify it. That's usually what I found.
Yeah.
But religion, it just has a way of instructing its believers how to think and what to think.
Yeah.
Even some of the most resilient people can conform to herd mentality. They can even conform to scenarios of extreme hate, divisiveness, and even violence. We humans are just susceptible to these things. That's just a reality.
We're social creatures, and so it's so comforting to be on the same page as other people.
Exactly.
And then the favorite part of that statement for me is the blood sacrifice cult, because when I was religious, I didn't see it. Now it's obvious that it is. So it's interesting.
It is. Yeah. That part of the description highlights the fact that Christianity is, in fact, it's a cult of human sacrifice.
Yeah.
Period. You can't deny it. Jesus, even in his own words, he not only justifies the disturbingly, symbolic and ritualistic act of eating his flesh and drinking his blood.
Yeah.
But Christianity also glorifies and celebrates this disturbingly bloody execution of this Jewish man in order for those who choose to believe be atoned for their sins by being covered by the blood of Jesus.
Right.
I remember bragging, saying stuff like that.
It's not sick for some reason when you're in it.
It's so weird.
Well, I think part of it, though, is it's so easy to see it as a metaphor now, because that's what it is in most churches, right? You're drinking wine or grape juice and you're eating a cracker.
Yeah, in today's days and age, it's not as literal as it used to be in Jewish tradition.
But those things are still representing that blood sacrifice.
And then in some brands of Christianity, like Catholicism, they believe it's actually the blood and body. But I think for most denominations of Christianity, it's just a symbol of it. But yeah, like you said, it's the symbol of that horrible tradition of sacrificing animals and putting blood on things.
Exactly. But when you look into, say, Judaism and Islam, even today, they still slaughter droves of animals, They douse themselves, they cover themselves in blood. Some of these denominations, they lick the blood, they'll drink the blood, they put the blood on their face. It's quite strange. And a disturbing song that comes to mind for me is a pretty popular song that we sang at Gateway Church, and it's called "Oh the Blood," that the lovely Carrie Job used to sing all the time. Oh, the blood, crimson love, price of life's demand, shameful sin placed on him, the hope of every man. Oh, the blood of Jesus washes me. Oh, the blood of Jesus shed for me. What a sacrifice that saved my life. Yes, the blood, it is my victory.
And people sing these songs. That's one, but there are countless songs that are just about the blood, being washed in the blood of Jesus, being covered in the blood of Jesus.
It's just archaic.
And we sing them. We sang them,
but
people still sing them week after week after week.
Really believing it.
And wholeheartedly. They're getting enraptured by it, caught up in this, and it brings people to tears and causes the
goosebumps.
The goosebumps and all of that, right?
Yeah.
The goosies. Yep. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, it's interesting as one-time Christian radio host, activist, and spokesman Seth Andrews, he boldly quotes that it is a church communion ritual where men, women, and children get together to ritualistically eat flesh and drink blood. Like, how is this normal? And now you look at it through the looking glass the other way around and go, oh my gosh, like how screwed up is that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That goes back to the psychologically delusional aspect of it. When you're in it, you've been deluded to think this is normal and this is what's right and good and holy.
Yeah, it was normal 2,000 years ago. But to embrace it now, it's just amazing that we're able to do that.
Well, if you ask most Christians today about any other religion where they are sacrificing something and sprinkling blood on either people or on artifacts or whatever, what they think of that, they're going to be appalled by it.
Yeah, Christians would be appalled by any other religion making the same sacrifices, doing the same blood sacrifices, but when it's their own, it's fine. I remember fully buying into that.
Yeah. All right, and so the last part of this phrase that you have is cult religion. And growing up, I always distinguished between religion and cult. That, Christianity is a religion, but it's not a cult like X. That's a cult, we're a religion. Scientology, that's a cult, we're a religion.
Yeah.
What do you mean by cult religion?
Well, for me, I use that term basically just a way of reinforcing that despite what religion or, religious individuals may think, the definition of religion fits quite well within the definition of a cult.
It does.
If you look at religion, it can be defined as a belief system, usually based on faith or belief in like doctrines of a religion based on spiritual apprehension rather than proof. Religions, they usually consist of a charismatic or like well-spoken individuals, like a clergy, elders, possibly like some prophets, and also like a base number of supporters. You have these believers, these devotees who obviously assist in funding the religion.
Yeah.
And they also serve to recruit other believers. A common formula or theme of some religions as a group or movement that share commitments, usually an extreme ideology. It's usually embodied in some type of leader, could be a divine leader, even charismatic humans like pastors. I think it's typically both.
Yeah.
And another basic characteristic requires at least varying levels of commitment from its members, while maintaining a strict hierarchy, typically like authoritative leaders who hear from or they may directly converse with God or the gods.
Yeah.
Now, for the definition of cult, it's a group of people who have religious beliefs or a set of beliefs. Interestingly enough, the Latin word is actually cultus, which actually means worship.
Yeah.
Cults, they have their beliefs, they have their practices that many people think of them as odd and often usually identified as like small and newly started religious movements. But in fact, Christianity, it was once labeled as a cult in its humble beginnings. Let's just face it, it had these strange beliefs and practices. People look at it and go like, wow, these people are weird.
Yeah.
It's a system of religious veneration and devotion directed towards a particular figure, regarded by others as, you could say, strange or even sinister, and even like a misplaced or excessive admiration for a particular person or thing.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to see. Look at there's definite likenesses that are going on here between cult and religion. And if you look at it as an outsider, simply by judging the fact that Christianity practices ritualistic acts of eating flesh and drinking blood while also celebrating the bloody execution of a Jewish man, I mean, this is extreme.
Yeah.
You even have instances where people speak in tongues, or they even claim like divine privilege, being able to prophesy and see the future. Honestly, take a step back and look at these things. You can easily see that Christianity is a disturbingly abhorrent cult-like religion.
Yes. From this perspective, it seems barbarous and archaic and just very unintellectual. But when you're in it, it seems like a beautiful sacrifice that God made, and that the ritualistic sacrifices of animals were set up to demonstrate what Jesus was gonna do. It was a foreshadowing or whatever. And so you see it as a story, but I think it's easier to cognitively dissonance yourself from it now, since it was so long ago. All these horrible things happened so long ago that it doesn't feel as horrific.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you hit it on the head too. The thing is taking a step back, looking on the outside, you realize, just take for instance these many examples that you see either within the Bible or these traditions, eating flesh, drinking blood, and you look at it and you're just like, this is archaic. This is disgusting. Like, how in the world has humanity even maintained these types of beliefs? And people are admired for it.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what religion does. It is so good at taking literally just some of the most disgusting things and turning them into something admirable.
Yeah.
So what did you do after you take this break from the band and you've decided to acknowledge that you have some very serious issues? What did you do next?
Serious issue.
Yeah.
Well, I would say definitely by this point, I had acknowledged in my mind that I was definitely a non-believer. I still, in my mind, I needed an experience of like 100% certainty. And I pondered, what could that be? And so it's just kind of spontaneous. But during the summertime, I had actually been invited by an old drummer friend of mine. Actually, he was the first drummer for the first band that we put together. He was getting married. I was like, yeah, of course. I mean, Christian wedding or whatever, I'm going to be there for my friends. After the wedding, as I was driving to the hotel, I changed my mind and I hit the road and I just kept going, basically to the middle of nowhere, Texas. And I'm going to meet with the God of the universe, this God that I've been following for so long, that I believed with all my mind, my heart, my soul, whatever you want to call it, as absolute truth. And at the same time with that, I was honest with myself and understanding that there were many other gods and goddesses and demigods, that have been put forward. I gave myself that honest opportunity and just honestly opened myself up and allow this God to just basically make itself known to me.
Yeah.
And so in complete openness, I asked for God, for Yahweh, or even it was Jesus, essentially just to speak to me in a way that the Bible describes. I wasn't going off of what I wanted. I wasn't going off of, anybody else's claims or whatever it may be. I'm like, no, I'm going to go by what the Bible says.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was the Bible speaks of booming voices from the heavens. It speaks of a talking burning bush. It talks of a talking snake and a talking donkey. If that's what it took to convince me or whatever it may be, I was open, I was honest, I was willing. Whatever animal it may be, whether it was an angel or whether God wanted to write in the stone or write in dirt or whatever it may be, I was willing to change my life forever from that point on.
Yeah. Participate in something that is classic to religion, right? I mean, somebody going out into the wilderness and experiencing communion with whatever God it is. Did he, she, they, it show up?
No, they didn't.
Could it be because you didn't fast for 40 days first or take any sort of hallucinogenic drug?
Yeah, I mean, there will always be something else to add, to the experience. But for me, ultimately, it was just about just being totally open to whatever experience it would be.
Yeah.
Being out there for 40 days or fasting, going hungry or taking drugs or whatever it may be. To me, that didn't really register. Mm-hmm. Why do I need to add on all this other fluffy stuff when it's just me and the God of the universe?
If there was reality to the situation, then I think that you'd be right. But from my current position, it would be because you didn't have drugs or you didn't have your mind in a weakened state where it was barely holding on. No delusions came. No schizophrenic type occurrences happened because your body was fully functional.
Exactly.
Yeah. But if it was true, God shouldn't need any of those things to happen to be able to meet with you.
Yeah.
With that, I was already surrounded by literally hundreds, if not thousands of people who claimed to speak with God in their minds at that moment.
Yeah.
Right.
Or that God gave them this job or helped them find their car keys, or the Holy Spirit would speak to them right there during a sermon and they would acknowledge that the Holy Spirit just spoke to them during the sermon,
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it was like, oh yeah, well, I mean, if that's so normal for everyone else,
yeah,
I was honest and open enough to have a wilderness experience just like these characters all throughout the Bible.
Yeah.
And that was the final event.
Mm-hmm.
That experience there, that, obviously nothing happened the entire night while I was out there. I even slept in my car, but nothing happened. And for me, that was the final event. It was the final nail in the coffin. And that is what ultimately assisted in me finalizing my decision to leave Christianity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember those last few moments of really crying out to God and praying and falling down in worship and just asking him to show himself because I was losing it. I don't remember a final moment, but I remember doing that a lot towards the end. And then I guess we told our pastors that we weren't going to be coming back to church, and we told our parents and immediate friends, but we didn't really share it with the general population until about a year and a half, 2 years after our leaving the church and denouncing religion. How did that part of it go for you?
Oh man, that was really interesting. It's always unique to see how people choose to let the world know if they choose to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For me, I kind of feel like a little bit of madness followed with that. Obviously, once I reached that point, I was like, I need to be 100% honest, not only with myself, but with the rest of the world. And that following month, I started posting these controversial questions. I chose Facebook, actually. I feel like if you want to address the world, at least at that time point anyway, you post it on Facebook. That's how you're going to let everybody know what's going on.
Right.
But, I started posting these controversial questions about religion, and obviously, specifically, some of them were about Christianity, but on the whole, it was about religion. And I chose to just be honest. I just revealed myself and my exodus from Christianity, and I feel that a substantial amount of people would be able to see this. Obviously, people that I were friends with, associated with, and also keeping in mind, too, that at least 99% of everyone on my Facebook were Christians.
Right.
Yeah, us too.
And so my mission was to not only openly and honestly and vulnerably reveal where I was regarding religion and where I was in my life to the world, but honestly, I was also genuinely wanting to have an honest and open dialogue with anyone who wanted to engage with me.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was believers or non-believers, if you were undecided or whatever was going on, I just wanted to have just a conversation. I didn't want to condemn anybody. I was just open to this conversation. It's not like I didn't have these conversations before, but obviously I knew that once I let everybody on Facebook know, then the conversations would be more diverse.
Right, yeah.
So this included opportunities for any religious individual to present any kind of salient or convincing arguments that might serve to change my mind,
Sure.
or at least lead me in a direction of exploration. Again, I was still open
Yeah.
and being honest. And although I had personally reached a convincing conclusion that all religions were essentially the same version of untruth, I still positioned myself to either be convinced otherwise, or at least be given information that would lead me on a journey of exploration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what I've experienced is since leaving Christianity, since leaving the certainty of faith, I feel much more open to changing my mind about things and being able to hear evidence and not just write it off because it doesn't agree with what I already thought was true.
Yeah, my mindset isn't, I'm going to believe this no matter what. It's, I'm going to believe based on the information that's presented at the time, but it's subject to change if I learn more. Like, if new information comes to light, I'm willing to shift gears.
Exactly. And I believe ultimately that is the healthiest way to approach anything. I do the same thing even with substantiated scientific data. You know,
Right.
It's like, these are scientific theories. They have been tested repeatedly. It's been peer reviewed. This is absolute certainty. And for me, I'm like, okay, well, I can still be skeptical though.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
what's so cool about being in this position, is that I can still question things. I can still research things, empower myself, and make up my own mind about it.
Yeah.
So you put yourself out there, you were open, you were honest with people, and well, how did that go?
It was wild. At that time period, I just released a few posts every once in a while, every few days or whatever, and they generated some of the longest threads I've ever seen on Facebook. I think that it even proved even further how contentious the nature of religion is.
Yeah.
I don't think they were long because people just kind of like wanted to try to prove that I was wrong. It just showed even further the reason why religion is such a contentious subject, especially Christianity, because obviously, you know, I had just come from a specific brand of Christianity, and there weren't very many people that were getting on there to tell me like, oh, by the way, Islam is the correct religion, or Jehovah's Witnesses is the correct way. No, it was just contention within my own version of Christianity.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it was everyone from the average churchgoer to old youth pastors, worship leaders, senior pastors. They were all commenting and trying to debate me. And also I had like a small little handful of non-believers who were also thankful that they were assisting me in this dialogue, because it was so much going on at that time.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to like lead your life, go to work and do what you need to do, and then find like that little bit of time to go home and spend hours trying to debate the whole world on why, you know, you think your religion is wrong. But I would say since that fall, the fall of 2015, when I chose to free myself from the clutches of that psychologically delusional mind slavery, blood sacrifice cult religion of Christianity, I have definitely come out the other end much more caring, much more giving, much more sympathetic, obviously brutally open and honest, learned, skeptical, as well as appreciative and understanding, and by far more knowledgeable than I was when my life was based on nothing but blind, devoted faith.
Yeah.
And this endless devotion to this mindlessly distorted cycle, which is nothing but church, Jesus, music, church, music, Jesus, church, music, Jesus.
Yeah.
And it's so freeing when you finally break that cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, spending multiple days out of the week with church devoted to Jesus, it's hard to spend time broadening your understanding of anything else.
And you almost feel guilty when you do, because it's time you could have spent reading the Bible, or it's time you could have spent in prayer. Like, so you almost feel
Right. Or time,
like you shouldn't be doing anything else.
Yeah, time you could have spent investing in other younger believers, or
Yeah.
proselytizing, you know, whatever it might be. You could have been doing more for Jesus, but instead you're spending your time learning about whatever else it is.
Yeah. What do you feel like are the reactions you got from other Christians that you knew, or your friends, family, for why you were leaving the faith?
Well, obviously, I've had conversations with many people of diverse religions and diverse versions of Christianity, if you will. But obviously, most of the conversations that I've had are obviously with Christians. And certainly not all of them have made and continue to make assumptions as to why I think I left church or how I lost my faith. However, I mean, there are several classic assumptions, all of which are not true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of them, I would say, you know, some believers, they've assumed that someone got to me.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've heard that comment. I'm just like, maybe I should dig in a little more and ask, what does that mean? But another common one is, I was hurt by the church.
Yeah.
Or, are you mad at God? Or, are you mad at me? Some people have assumed that I left because they even agree that a lot of Christians are actually, in fact, they're bad people.
Yeah.
They're toxic. Many Christians are extremely hypocritical, even the good ones. And therefore, these people, they assume that I left because of one of, or maybe even all of these reasons.
Yeah.
Again, none of these are true. Not even close.
Yeah.
Honestly, I never left the church because I was mad. I never left because someone upset me. I never left because I disagreed with tithing or how much I should attend church or read my Bible. Never left because I disagreed with theological issues or even perspectives. No one ever freaked me out or did anything out of the ordinary. I never left when people screamed hysterically in tongues or began screaming like a demon. People running around hysterically. I've seen people crawl on all fours. People bark like dogs. People claiming healing or miracles in the name of their God. Or even when people spoke over me and prophesied about my own future. And also, I never left because I never felt holy or worthy enough. Or the fact that I had seen literally hundreds of people speak in tongues and I was never able to. And in actuality, I was actually quite envious of attaining that gift of speaking in tongues. You know? But while I was a Christian for most of my life, many times I was involved behind the curtain. I was right there hanging out with pastors, youth pastors, you name it, back in the green room, waiting to get up there and play worship music. And the thing is honestly, I saw and experienced a lot of very dark and disturbing aspects of Christianity. That's just the fact of it. But again, none of those situations ever triggered me to question my faith or ever leave my religion.
I've heard that I've been taken in by Satan, or that there must be something horrible going in my life, or that the church that I was going to did something to me. But that's not the case. When we left the faith, I was enthralled by it. I loved serving God. I loved serving Jesus. I loved the people that I was with. I was really happy.
Yeah.
I left because I didn't see it as truth. And that's just the sum of it. I had learned too much to see it as truth. Nothing else matters if it's not reality. It didn't to me anyway when I left. And it doesn't to me now.
Yeah, even for me, my final day that I left, because I figured out the final day I was leaving, and once I was done, I was going to walk out those doors and that was it. And even with that, usually I played, it was a Tuesday night college service, and usually I played those services, but that night I wasn't up to play. But instead, we actually had like this after party thing, and they wanted somebody to play an acoustic set. And one of my really good friends, her name is Ivy, she was asked to just kind of put together a set, and she asked me to play guitar for her. And we played like several of these secular songs, and it was an absolute blast. It was a lot of fun playing that last time, and it was enjoyable.
Yeah.
But I knew that once I walked out those doors, that was it.
Well, I think in our next episode, we can get into kind of the nitty-gritty of why you left Christianity. Really, why any of us no longer believe Christianity. We can kind of go through some of the specifics of that. So maybe we can do some questions for this episode before we get into that. So, final questions. What do you think of that description of Christianity as a psychologically delusional, mind slavery, blood sacrifice cult religion? Do you think it's a fair description? Are there certain parts of that you disagree with? And if so, why?
And is there anything in your life right now that challenges the existence of your particular God? Are you learning anything that would contradict your belief system?
And question 3, for fear of what the consequences might be, did you ever choose to refrain from talking to an authoritative figure, like a pastor, or even like a friend about something in the Bible or a sermon that you disagreed with or found absurd or contradictory? If yes, then why?
So one more time, that was, what are your thoughts about David's description of Christianity as a psychologically delusional, mind slavery, blood sacrifice cult religion?
And are you learning anything, or is there anything in your life that challenges the existence of your particular God?
And for fear of what the consequences might be, did you ever choose to refrain from talking to an authoritative figure like a youth pastor or a pastor, or even a friend about something in the Bible or a sermon that you disagreed with or found absurd or contradictory? If yes, then why?
Thanks for listening to Questioning Faith.
We hope you guys enjoyed it.
If you have any thoughts or questions, you can reach us at kennyandmonicaAskQuestions@gmail.com.
You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter.
Our next episode, A Fellow Apostate Part 3, will be released on February 17th. But until then, remember,
always ask questions.
Hi, I'm Kenny,
And this is Monica,
and you're listening to Questioning Faith,
a podcast where we discuss our journey with the Christian faith.
In today's episode, A Fellow Apostate, Part 3, we go through a list of reasons why David doesn't think the Bible is believable.
It's not every reason that caused him to leave the faith, but I wholeheartedly agree with his list, and we kind of expound on a few of the points, but mostly it's just a run-through of his ideas on why the Bible is not trustworthy, and a bunch of claims that are really far out there.
Everything you're about to hear is actually mentioned in the Bible. So if you want to believe the Bible to be true, you have to also accept all of these things to be true.
Right. Not only just far out claims, but also some very immoral ideas.
Yeah.
So we hope you guys liked listening to our interview.
And if you would like to hear us interview more people, feel free to send names our way.
So here's the third and final part of our Zoom interview with David.
In our last episode, we finished off with you discussing a lot of the misconceptions that people have had towards why you left Christianity.
So now we can cover more in depth on why you did leave. So maybe we can start off talking about your experience with religion overall, or your big takeaway from it.
Oh yeah, I loved church. I could not wait to go every time I went, not only just because I was a musician and many times had to be there, but I loved it. I loved every bit of it. Usually it was several times a week. I loved seeing my friends and even, quote, my family. I was involved with everything from small town churches, these little humble churches, to medium size, all the way up to mega churches. And then not to mention too, like all the many churches that my own band was affiliated with. To me, the reason I was even involved in the first place with any of those churches was because that is where I absolutely knew that is where God wanted me to be. Period. I had zero doubts. It never crossed my mind.
Yeah.
I just loved being a part of a Christian community, and the culture was something I never questioned. It was normal. It was all I ever knew. I was a musician for almost every church I was a part of, and in my mind, I was always excited to do the work of the Lord. That's it. It's just always to do the work of the Lord. As long as I knew I was following in the footsteps of Jesus, I never feared whatever direction he would take me. And I saw myself and my bandmates who invested literally tens of thousands of dollars and hours of writing songs and rehearsing and recording and being on the road, playing all these different places and loading and reloading the trailers and literally living this blood, sweat, and tears lifestyle because we were fully invested in spreading the gospel with what we referred to as our God-given gifts. These were our God-given talents. This was my normal for a very long time, and I never questioned it. Even we had some bad situations happen with my band. We were wronged many times. We were taken advantage of. Sometimes we were cut deep by other believers. But there was just never an instance of questioning my faith or my religion at all. And obviously, my experience of going through a divorce, no memories at all of questioning Christianity or the church or my faith.
So if you loved it so much, it was something that was just such a huge part of your life, the natural question is, well, then why leave?
Yeah, what happened? What changed?
Well, obviously, like I mentioned earlier, it's definitely a process.
Yeah.
I chose to leave after having spent literally thousands of hours researching the Christian religion I was a part of. And obviously, the sciences, these different subjects, everything from psychology and astronomy to biology, literature, art, world religions, world history. Honestly, I just came to the conclusion that there was no proof or evidence for any of this. And obviously, the same thing with all these different gods. We casually speak of Odin and Thor and Zeus and all these different types of gods, all these dead gods. Gosh, even Satan and Jesus himself. There's no proof. There's no evidence that any of these things exist.
Yeah.
Mankind's invented these over 5,000 gods, goddesses, and demigods, and billions of people worshipped. They lived, they fought, they died for all of these gods over thousands of years. Yeah, it's just the reality we have to face.
Yeah. It's that saying, I've heard plenty of atheists say it, that Christians are atheists as well. It's just that modern day atheists have chosen to disbelieve in one more God than they have.
Exactly.
Right? Christians, they don't believe in all those others. And the
4,999 other gods that they are atheists towards.
Right.
Exactly.
It's just the one additional one.
And I didn't stop there either. I wanted to be just totally open and honest. I did intense research, everything from spirits and demons, ghosts, goblins, witches, sorcery, vampires, black magic, white magic, seances, you name it, werewolves. I mean, I just felt it was really important to go down this road, especially like a very blasphemous kind of road.
Yeah.
Just empower myself by learning about these things.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, I was and I still am completely open to the truth of any of it, if anybody has anything. But in the end, there's absolutely no proof and no evidence up to this point. I simply left because I chose to question and answer brutally these uncomfortable questions regarding these religions, especially the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and challenged myself to learn as much as possible. And up to this point, I would say my conclusion it's been exactly the same. The immense beauty of reality and absolute truth. Rational thinking will always destroy myth, magic, superstition, and fairy tales. And I feel that it's only a matter of time that mankind finally reaches a point that it ditches those primitive ideologies, finally catches up to the immense beauty that is reality.
One can hope.
Yeah, I wonder how far away that is.
Yeah.
Where these ideologies and these religions, at the very least, aren't having such a huge impact on the way that we run our societies. Even the US or plenty of other democratic societies, governments, that are supposed to be absent of religion, they're still so heavily influenced by religion because that's the default for most people.
Yeah, it's ingrained in us very deeply.
So you said there's no proof, there's no evidence, which that's something that we've said too, and what I've heard responses to that are, well, it's not about proof, it's not about evidence, it's about believing, it's about faith, right? Trusting in the word of God or trusting that this is true. So maybe we should talk a bit about
Specifics.
This Bible, this quote-unquote word of God that is supposed to be infallible.
What problems do you have with it?
Yeah, for me, I think ultimately it just comes down to a reality check, just acknowledging, maybe even just kind of beginning there, just the blatant absurdities within the Abrahamic religions. The Abrahamic religions, especially Christianity, they oddly claim that the Bible as infallible.
Right.
We're looking at the perfect, divine, inspired words of an all-good, all-knowing, all-powerful, supreme deity, creator deity of the universe. But I see the documents as, it's 1,000 times over, inconsistently flawed superstition. It's blood-soaked. We got bloodlust God. It's fear-driven. It's nonsensical. It's a disturbingly mythological compilation. The documents are attested to by, world-renowned theologians and archaeologists and religious scholars as within the highest pedigrees as being just copies of copies of copies. These are highly discrepant manuscripts full of hundreds of thousands of inconsistencies and mistakes. It's been altered. It's been changed. It's been edited, reworded. And the thing is I've been told by believers that I am the unreasonable one who will fail in my godless life and has lost touch with reality. So I think we should do a little reality check.
Sounds good.
Well, and as far as like the inconsistencies go, I think it's impressive how blind I was to the inconsistencies and how I was just very easily would say, well, no, there's an explanation for them. Mm-hmm. You can give me these, but really there's a way around it.
Even if I don't understand it, there's going to be a way around it.
But really, I mean, like you said, there are so many inconsistencies. We might put a link to a cool source. It's the Skeptic's Annotated Bible, and it just kind of goes through and shows all of the different contradictions based on verse or based on topic. And
even if you can find a way to rationalize a few of them, there's just so many more.
It's overwhelming.
That you can't,
But so let's go through this reality check then and talk about some of the just kind of ridiculous claims that are made by this so-called infallible word of God.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I would say these documents, they contain, but are certainly not limited to, naked human prototypes in a sacred garden with enchanted trees containing humanity condemning fruit. Divine Palestinian magician zombie man born of a virgin. Chariots of fire and booming voices from the heavens. Wooden staffs that turn into snakes. They have a contradictory earth-destroying flood with a boat that's built by a 600-year-old man sheltering 8 people and apparently hundreds of millions of species of animals reaching death-inducing heights of extreme freezing temperatures in an oxygen-depleted atmosphere. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Man-made tower reaching to the heavens, in turn causing God to come down and confuse languages. Samson. Long-haired, barbaric, perverse, violently vengeful Hulk smasher, slayer of 1,000 Philistine soldiers with a single jawbone of a donkey, who kills a lion with his bare hands, who also later eats honey from a beehive inside the dead lion, who also ties together tails of 300 foxes with torches to burn a city's food supply, and he mindlessly kills 30 innocent people for their clothes for losing a riddle. And on and on.
Yeah.
Yeah, this flood, something that we never thought about as far as the flood is concerned, is how any of that would actually be possible. If there really was enough rain over 40 days and 40 nights to be able to cover even the tallest mountain, Mount Everest, how much rain, how much water actually has to fall from the sky, and where does that water even come from? This shows a complete lack of understanding of the water cycle. Well, where was the water to begin with? And then now, where is that water now? And then you mentioned like the oxygen depleted atmosphere. In order for it to be covering Mount Everest, you're not breathing up there. Not without some kind of assistance.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, two, I found that the more you dive into that and try to, ultimately what it is you're jumping through hoops.
Right.
Where does this water come from? Well, it comes from the firmament. Well, what's the firmament?
Right.
Oh, this covering over the earth where there's holes poked into it. I mean, you've got this weird kind of flat earth concept and so you just keep jumping through hoops,
Yeah.
and it doesn't make any sense. You start looking like a crazy person trying to square this story.
Exactly. And then the Tower of Babel, whatever the reason God wanted to stop it happening, coming together too high, or maybe the people being united in their language and being able to do whatever they want. Well, why is God okay with these sorts of things now?
The International Space Station and
United
rocket
Nations,
ships and
various different things. We're able to go beyond the quote-unquote firmament.
right, and we're so much more connected than we've ever been with the internet and with Google Translate, so the differentiation of languages is almost irrelevant. So much more that we have now that God doesn't have a problem with.
Yeah.
But you can't ask those kinds of questions if you want to continue on in your faith.
True. Well, we definitely can't ignore the fact that Abraham, he's pretty psychotic. We're looking at a delusional man. He's 120 years old, by the way, who heard voices in his head to commission him to sacrifice his son by stabbing him to death as a burnt offering to test his faith to the said voices in his head.
Like if somebody did that today, like if somebody told us today, hey, I'm going to go sacrifice my son because God told me to.
We would understand that they're nuts.
Yeah.
But since this happened so long ago, we're able to overlook that somehow.
The fact that it's made it into a holy book makes it okay, unfortunately, for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is very disturbing.
Yeah.
We see a book with a manipulative talking snake.
Yeah.
Advice-giving donkey. A man who lived inside a fish for 3 days. Got some unicorns.
That's in some of the older versions, like New King James.
Which brings up another, like, just a funny point, or ironic point for me, is that the newer translations saw fit to get rid of unicorns because so obviously not real, but they're okay with leaving in the talking donkey and the talking snake.
Yeah. Yeah, unicorns are clearly the line.
I think it's discrimination, to be honest. Resurrection of dead prophets who then walk the streets of Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
Talking burning bush.
Mm-hmm.
We've got mind readers. We've got seers of the future. Angels from heaven having sex with human women.
Yep.
Yeah.
A God who easily forgets about his own people and the covenants he has made with them and entire populations. A forgetful God. That's quicker for me. That's crazy.
Yeah, and that goes back to, like, the contradictions. Forgetful God who also claims to never forget. Like, okay.
Yeah.
We have a God who has to be constantly reminded, a God who proudly admits to handicapping, blinding, muting, and deafening, a God who admits to creating darkness and evil,
Yep.
a God who is powerless against enemies who use chariots of iron. We have a God who condones the slaughter of innocent animals to atone for mistakes or sins committed by people instead of these individuals just owning up to their mistakes.
Right. That one was a big one for me,
Yeah.
that God would use animals in that way.
Well, yeah, and then extending that to really any kind of,
Displacement of responsibility.
yeah, how is that just? Where's the justice in that?
Exactly. Yeah. We have a God who purposefully hardens hearts and proceeds to deprive, torture, infest, starve, and kill thousands of innocent animals and people.
Mm-hmm.
Here's one that I really enjoy is an all-knowing God who creates a being, Lucifer, Satan, whichever your flavor is, with full knowledge that he will betray God, therefore banishing this evil celestial rival in an unfathomably massive universe filled with trillions upon trillions upon trillions of galaxies, filled with trillions upon trillions of stars and planets, to the exact same planet where his human prototypes were created.
Yeah, it's funny. That's a good way of putting it. Could have banished him somewhere else, I suppose, with less power.
That is the ineptitude of God.
Yeah. Well, the problem is, though, we're looking at it from a postmodern, post-scientific perspective.
Yeah, they didn't know any of those things.
Yeah, they had the firmament, not actually stars and billions of galaxies, right?
Exactly. And what's interesting about that is also allowing Satan and his demons, the Bible states an incredibly massive 1/3 of the perfect creator God's angels, by the way, to roam freely, influence, manipulate, coerce, and toy with the failed human prototypes and subsequently billions of future generations.
Yeah.
And then torture those human prototypes forever for being seduced by those evil legions.
Yeah.
That's logic right there.
Yeah.
We have leviathans and behemoths. We have dragons and sea monsters, mutants, creatures covered in eyeballs, and multi-headed beasts to inhabit both heaven and hell. An exodus from Egypt, 3 to 6 million people, along with their belongings and animals, wandering a dry, barren, uninhabitable desert for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We have a lonely, eternal, infinitely powerful God who, by the way, if you think about it, he already had a son, he had a Holy Spirit, freaky mutant beasts, elders with crowns, and legions upon legions of angels, but he chooses to create easily corruptible, lesser human prototype beings for companionship in desperate need of worship through the senseless burning of animal carcasses.
Yeah.
The promise of eternal torture and hellfire for not believing a deity that proved itself through magic in a tiny, primitive, insignificant region of the earth. We have a promise of a heavenly celestial dictatorship of infinite worship and submission for believing without proof or evidence of myth, magic, superstition, and fairy tales.
Right.
The holy word of God that is more involved with delivering details of lustful women who value phalluses as large as horses and emissions as powerful as donkeys. Definitely feel a worship song coming on strong. We have cutting pregnant women open and smashing their unborn infants against rocks. That sounds fun.
Yeah.
Condoned senseless slaughter of hundreds of thousands of men, women, children, infants, grandparents, and innocent animals while keeping the 32,000 virgins alive for yourself as sex slaves.
That's when women were viewed as property and not really as people, so it didn't matter.
Sounds like a fun time, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
You have giant she-bears who are summoned by God who tear 40 children apart simply for calling a prophet bald. Appeasing God with animal sacrifice and covering doors with blood in fear of angels of death killing firstborn sons.
It's brutal when you think about it all from this light.
Yeah, this God who is supposed to be promoting life and goodness sure is a lot of death and torture.
Yeah, for the sake of needing worship for himself.
Yeah.
Worship me or die a bloody death.
Yeah.
We also have healing spit mud. We have walking on water, turning water into wine, transferring demons from possessed people to suicidal pigs.
Mm-hmm.
Plenty of wizards. We have witches, sorcerers, magicians, rivers turned into blood. We have Joshua stopping the sun in the sky to win a battle.
Right.
An all-knowing God who places a bet with the devil and allows senseless torture of Job and the killing of his family and his animals. An all-knowing God, all good, all-knowing, all-powerful, supreme God of the universe who takes sides in wars and even bends to the wishes of human affairs. They have men who lived almost 1,000 years old in a time where it was uncommon to live past the age of 40. Here's some of my favorite ones. A homosexual mob of townsmen wanting to rape male messenger angels. With that, we also have a righteous father who's willing to offer his 2 virgin daughters to said mob to rape as a distraction. And then later, both of these virgin daughters incestuously rape their righteous sleeping elderly father in a cave 2 nights in a row after getting him drunk and subsequently becoming pregnant by their own elderly father.
Right.
Poor woman turned into a pillar of salt.
It's all these miracles and stuff that you're supposed to just accept, and you're the one that's ridiculous if you think that it's not real. From the Christian perspective, if you don't believe that feeding 15,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and a couple of fish, if you find that ridiculous, then you're the one who's nuts.
Yeah. And these are all very miraculous things to happen.
Right.
So then taking it a step further of saying, okay, well, there's a lot of miraculous things to happen over the course of just a few thousand years. Most of it confined to simply hundreds of years. Why did all of those miracles stop? What happened to all of this kind of stuff? Why do we not still see talking animals? Or why don't we see people getting turned into salt for simply turning around and watching something? Any of it. It's one thing to think that, okay, this one miraculous thing happened and we can't then verify it and recreate it. But then when you have claim after claim after claim after claim after claim of miraculous instances
With no evidence for it.
with no evidence for them, and then they just suddenly stop once we can start actually recording things and actually verify them.
Yeah.
Exactly. What's the coincidence?
All right.
And the thing is you can have these conversations with believers to this day, and if they do sincerely believe that miracles still do take place today, and they can actually they'll give you, oh, well, this happened or that happened, or so-and-so's leg grew, or so-and-so's bills got paid, or whatever. These miracles, it's okay, I'm on board with you, but I'm going to need a little bit more than, your hearsay.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you have proof? Do you have evidence? And strangely enough, there's never a video camera around. There's never anything like that, available to actually broadcast these miracles.
Exactly.
Right.
In a world where there are video cameras literally everywhere.
In everybody's pocket.
Yeah.
Even within the depths of third world countries, we have high definition video cameras catching all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
But strangely enough, no miracles.
Yeah.
We're not
Right.
getting.
There's always a better explanation for it than magic.
Sure. We definitely have parting of the Red Sea.
Mm-hmm.
We have reviving dead people. We have flying winged horses.
Yeah.
Ascension to the heavens. If you think about it, whatever or wherever that is. We have earth populating incest and a whole lot more incest. We have the slaughter of an entire army simply to collect penile foreskins as a dowry. That sounds fun.
That's David, right?
Yeah, that's good old David.
Yeah.
Your namesake.
And I get compared to him all the time still. And I'm like, no, hard pass, thanks. We have bride price. We have racism, sexism, misogyny, cruelty to animals, obviously pointless ritualistic animal slaughter and sacrifice, glorified human sacrifice, cannibalism, eating your own children, eating flesh and drinking blood. Women are inferior to men and are seen as property. Mortal men who bargain with God and change his mind. Mortal men who calm down this angry, hate-filled, vengeful God to change his actions of resorting to senseless mass genocide.
Yeah.
Who knew that God could be convinced?
Yeah, not to mention mortal man wrestling with that god and defeating him in a wrestling match.
Yeah, God just let him win.
He just let him win. Yeah, exactly. Somebody will write this down eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have plenty of pointless, nonsensical rituals, people hundreds of years old giving birth to children, surviving a furnace unscathed, surviving a lion's den untouched, glorified liars, glorified adulterers, glorified bigotry, condoned genital mutilation, condoned polygamy, condoned rape, condoned slavery, condoned ethnic cleansing, condoned genocide, and of course, lots of condoned incest. If you're a witch, if you're a sorcerer, or anyone who sacrifices to any other god other than Yahweh, you must be put to death. Jesus even said, think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. And he also said to his disciples, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. Ask yourself, why would this gentle and meek turn the other cheek Jesus want his disciples to sell their clothes and buy a sword?
Right.
Yeah.
Also, gotta think to yourself, do the bloody and violent Old Testament laws of the prophets still hold up in Jesus' time? Well, in fact, he condones every bit of it when he says in Matthew 17, do not think I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of the pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished.
Yeah.
So what do you do if you lust with your eyes? Cut them out. What do you do if you fondle yourself? Cut off your hands. Permission from God to stone your disobedient children to death.
Spare the rod, spoil the child.
Yeah. Permission from God to stone people of different sexual orientation to death.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Permission from God to cut the hands of a woman off for touching your penis during a fight.
So oddly specific.
Yeah.
So again, think about it. I'm the unreasonable one, out of touch with reality. We have to observe that this list is only but a tip of the iceberg, considering the obvious inconsistencies and madness that comprises the Bible, as well as bloodthirsty genocidal war god and highly contradictory demigod.
Yeah. God of war.
Yeah, it really is amazing when you run through everything that's in there and see.
When you're not cherry picking just the good things that God did, all of the horrors and what he's actually claiming to have accomplished. It's terrifying and ridiculous. But then somehow the reality of God's beauty is revealed in nature and what he's accomplished. But that's not, when you look at what the truth that the Bible is claiming, it's not beautiful at all. It's horrific.
Right. And obviously anyone can cherry pick the Bible or cherry pick many other holy books that have absolutely disgusting passages and still find passages that are poetic and beautiful in their own way.
Right.
I think very rarely you're going to go to a church service and you're going to hear a preacher preaching anything from that short list. It's all going to be all the light and fluffy, happy clappy stuff. Your Jeremiah 29:11 than
Yeah.
all your lovey-dovey stuff.
Yeah. Well, and then when some of the disgusting stuff is portrayed or is discussed, it's always told in a way that makes it not seem really all that bad.
Yeah, the people deserved it somehow. All the babies who were slammed up against rocks, they deserved it because of their parents' actions, or it was a result of sin in humankind, so God was justified in doing it.
Yeah. Or Job's family being murdered. Whether you believe God in chapter 1 or chapter 2, either by God's doing or by God's allowing. It's for his glory, and God has to glorify himself, and that's the price that just had to be paid. And
yeah, it goes back to when you start with the premise that God is good, you can justify anything in your mind if you're already deluded.
Yeah.
As well as the argument that many Christians make that God's ways are higher than our ways, therefore we can't understand those higher ways.
Yeah.
And that the examples of the atrocities that we see within these documents can be justified simply because God is so powerful and above our ways that anything that he does, even if it's horrible, can still be viewed as good.
Yeah.
And again, that verifies right there exactly what indoctrination is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the mindset of the end justifying the means. God is going to accomplish his plan, even if it causes the torture and misery of millions of people. Like, God has to accomplish what he needs to accomplish. So it's this end justifies the means mentality that most people accept now as wrong and immoral.
Exactly.
So clearly, there's a lot in the Bible, and then there's plenty of evidence, like you mentioned, to even just distrust whether or not the Bible we have is the original, being copies of copies of copies that were manipulated, that were changed throughout history. And even if it is the original words,
There's terror in it.
yeah, it's not a peace-preaching document that is all about the love of this God for his people. So I guess what's the takeaway? After going through and seeing your experience in Christianity, the experiences that led you out of Christianity, and the learning that led you out of Christianity, and then really kind of digging into some of, all caps, some of the reasons why you don't find it believable anymore. What's the takeaway for all of this?
Well, personally, I can say with confidence, just speaking for myself, that if I can make it out, then anybody can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come to an understanding that this is delusional psychosis. And once you come to the realization of that, you can work in a direction to where you're able to reprogram yourself
Yeah.
and actually begin to purge yourself of the poison that is religion, whatever religion it may be. I mean, personally, I would say we can all now rest easy knowing that this controlling, this manipulative and bloodthirsty tyrant war god and the demigod of the Bible are not only disgustingly abhorrent creatures, but they simply can't exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say if morals and guidelines to life are set in stone by the deity of the Bible, and in the words of Richard Dawkins, this God is portrayed as arguably the most unpleasant character in all of fiction. He is jealous and proud of it. He's a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser who is a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully, then I certainly want no part in that.
Yeah.
And up to this point, so far, this all-knowing, all-powerful war god and virgin birth Jewish demigod of the Bible, as well as their devotees, none of them have been able to prove me wrong. No gods have showed up to me and said you're wrong.
Yeah.
But I'd also say, looking at what we've described and easily dismissing these facts that the war god and demigod portrayed within these is not only morally reprehensible, but it's also intellectually dishonest as well.
Yeah, for sure.
And I would say continuing to waste your life following and advocating a non-existent god and demigod that sends innocent children and adults to eternal torture and fiery damnation for not believing as true a book filled with these talking animals and magicians and witches, blood magic and virgin birth demigod who can walk on water, or even degrading yourself as a filthy, disgusting sinner and mindlessly submitting and kneeling before it. It's a crime against you and humanity itself.
Right. And it's really psychologically damaging to any individual. And I think that's causing a lot of issues for a lot of people to be raised with that kind of mindset. Like from childhood, being told that you're worthless without God really does a number on a person's psyche. Instead of being told that they're beautiful and that they have value in and of themselves, being fed the opposite at such a young age age when you're so formative.
Yeah.
It's child abuse, you know?
That's true. Yeah, I would say, adding to that, quoting Bible verses, it's no longer this magical talisman that can be used by the delusional elite, these religious apologists, who I'm sure we've watched plenty of, or any of these hyper-Christian nationalist evangelicals. They can't use this magical talisman anymore to justify the existence of these non-existent gods and demigods. In the words of ex-evangelical preacher and Christian music artist of 17 years, Dan Barker, get rid of the baggage. Take that monkey, take that Bible off your back. Rise above that toddler mentality and stop pessimistically seeing yourself as sick and in need of a doctor. If you look at the Bible with not a bias of faith and loyalty, you can very easily see that it is not a reliable book to base your life on.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the trick though, right? You have to be able to look at it
From a non-biased standpoint.
From that non-biased standpoint. And while you're in the faith,
it's almost impossible to do.
Yeah, it's so hard to take a look at it and just put it on par with everything else.
You've invested so much time and energy and emotion into it that your mind is almost incapable of doing it. But with a conscious effort and critical thinking, it's possible.
Yeah, you can break out of that mind slavery.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, I would say religion, obviously, it's permeated mankind for far too long. And it's a long time coming, but I do really think that our species needs to finally grow up and shed this obvious poisonous Abrahamic cult religions. Begin living life not bound by these psychological cult religious mind slavery concepts. And obviously, when we approach life with a pure, brutally honest, uncomfortable, unadulterated truth, life is so much more exciting, it's curious, it's fulfilling, it's satisfying, beautifully nuanced, poetically nuanced without religion. And I would say, speaking from personal experience and as well as my newfound true freedom, I'm definitely proof that anyone can climb out of the prison that they've spent all their lives designing to look like a mansion.
Nice.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, life, there's so much more to life outside of religion, because inside of that religion, everything has to be looked at through the lens of how does it glorify God? How does it help me understand God, instead of seeing things for their own beauty or for their own terror or for their own merit in whatever way. You have to look at it through a very specific lens, and so it becomes so much more once you step out of that and once you remove the shades.
Yeah,
it's very true.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the show. We appreciate having another voice, someone who has been through an experience like we have been through, to come on and share that experience, open up. Even though you went through that vulnerable experience before and you know what that's like, it is something to share it again with a new audience, with more people.
Yeah, it can be emotionally taxing.
Yeah. So we appreciate that, and I'm sure our listeners appreciate it, to hear what you said again there at the end, that you're proof that anyone can climb out of it. That however deep you feel that you're in, you can ask the questions. You can seek out the truth. You can seek out the answers, and you can climb out of this.
Yeah, it'll take some time, but it's doable.
Yeah.
Well, definitely. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And of course, encourage everyone to question everything.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of questions, let's do our final questions for this little series. Let's see.
Do you think it's possible that you have been indoctrinated into the religion that you currently believe?
And then I would ask, were you aware of all these examples we went through of just how the God of the Bible, the Jesus of the Bible, command, and condone such atrocious behavior? If you were aware of it and you still believe, how do you justify it? How do you rectify it? And do you feel like that's intellectually or morally honest?
And if you were shown a long list of many examples all throughout the Bible of its inconsistencies, would they be enough for you to take the valuable time to research them and eventually draw your own conclusions?
Nice. Okay. So all together, one last time, that was, is it possible that you have been indoctrinated?
How do you justify the atrocious behaviors that are condoned and commanded and committed by the God of the Bible?
And if you were shown a long list of many examples all throughout the Bible of its inconsistencies, would they be enough for you to take the valuable time to research them and eventually draw your own conclusions?
Thanks for listening to Questioning Faith.
We hope you guys enjoyed it.
If you have any thoughts or questions, you can reach us at kennyandmonicaAskQuestions@gmail.com.
You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter.
Our next episode, on marriage, will be released on March 3rd. But until then, remember,
always ask questions.